In 1992, Hurricane Andrew, a Category 5 hurricane, steers a course straight for South Florida.
Wind from Andrew was a sustained 165 miles per hour with gusts over 175 miles an hour. The storm surge reached more than 15 feet.
Just as police catch wind of a gruesome double homicide.
It is the most vicious, the most heinous, the most violent of acts.
It kind of shook us up. We didn't have many double homicides of a mother and daughter.
I remember just sitting down on the couch and I didn't say a word. I was just in total shock.
Could this powerful storm enable the killer to get away with double murder?
Hundreds of thousands of people evacuated. There was no power. It was just pure devastation.
I don't think people really recognize the level of destruction that a hurricane can bring upon an area until after Andrew went through.
On the east coast of South Florida lies the coastal fishing town of Lantana in Palm Beach County, one of the largest and wealthiest counties in the country.
Lantana is relatively small and filled with working-class neighborhoods. It's more of the suburbs of Palm Beach County, which is part of the metropolitan area of Miami, often called South Florida.
Palm Beach County is a pretty diverse community. It goes from very rural, agricultural in the western part of the county, all the way to where the city of Palm Beach is, and billionaires live there.
World-renowned for its picturesque beaches, the area consists mainly of barrier islands and peninsulas between the Intracoastal Waterway on the west and the Atlantic Ocean on the east.
Palm Beach County, Florida is a beautiful place. It's very densely populated, constantly growing. There's never a lack of people that want to move to live by the water.
Visitors and residents alike flock to Palm Beach County, not only for its beauty, but for the weather.
I think a lot of people come down there on vacation and just see how gorgeous the weather is all year round, and they decide to stay.
There's only one thing the locals here dread.
A drawback of living in Florida is that you have the hurricanes that come through.
Hurricanes and tropical storms are a big aspect for people that live in Palm Beach County and all South Florida, really. Everybody pretty much knows when the storm season begins.
Hurricane season officially begins June 1st and lasts through November 30th, with the majority of hurricanes forming in August and September. They're classified on a 1 to 5 wind scale that ranges 75 miles per hour for Category 1 hurricane to over 155 miles per hour for a Category 5.
A hurricane, when it hits, there can be storm surge issues, high winds. The amount of water that it can leave could cause flooding. It can really do some damage.
Evacuations are often ordered when a hurricane is forecast to impact the area.
Everybody kind of seems to leave all at once, and the main highway out of town, I-95 North, can get backed up. Then all the alternative routes, they get backed up too.
So it's not always easy to evacuate. That's why they tell you to do it early. If you wait too long, sometimes you can't get out.
There are certain areas that are designated as mandatory evacuation zones. Everyone has their own plan of attack if a Category 5 or a Category 4 storm's headed your way.
In August of 1992, everyone's fears are realized when Hurricane Andrew, a powerful Category 5 hurricane, barrels through South Florida.
No one thought it was going to be as bad as it was.
Hurricane Andrew was the worst hurricane to ever hit Florida.
As Hurricane Andrew rages toward the Florida Peninsula, a 911 call comes in.
The call to police occurred in the evening hours of August 22nd, 1992, right when Hurricane Andrew was kind of rolling around in the Atlantic Ocean, headed our way at the time.
The caller is a woman named Karen Tibesio. She says she's the sister-in-law of 45-year-old Rita Beto, who lives in the Runaway Bay Apartments in Lantana with her daughter, 20-year-old Lisa Beto.
Rita Beto failed to show up for work. Rita was a very responsible employee, very conscientious in her work, and when she didn't show up for her 8:30 shift, people became concerned.
They left messages on her answering machine and became so concerned, they called her brother. So her brother, Tom, and sister-in-law, Karen, had come up to her apartment to check on her.
That's when she says Tom found a horrifying scene.
What he could see was Rita's legs on the floor upside down in one of the back bedrooms. He walked a little further and could see she was not moving. Lisa was on the bed not moving, and there was blood everywhere. He then backed up and told Karen to call 911.
When the responding deputy made entry, he discovered the bodies of Rita Beto and Lisa Beto in the master bedroom.
It was apparent that they had suffered some type of penetrating wound to the head, both women.
It's clearly the result of a vicious double homicide. Rita Ann Tibesio was born on July 13, 1947, in the small town of Torrington, Connecticut.
My mother grew up family first. Her parents were tremendous people. She had 2 other siblings. They lived here pretty much their entire lives.
In 1967, Rita married James Beto and started a family of her own. They had their son Alan the following year, and 4 years later, their daughter Lisa was born.
My father was an accountant, so he was more of a traditional type of father. He would go to work all day and then come home and expect the meal to be ready.
Rita was the one who was there all the time. She stayed home and was a loving and doting mother, and her kids were everything to her.
Lisa grew to be a very pretty and athletic teenager. In high school, she was a skilled tennis player.
She loved being an athlete. She was very timid and quiet on the outside, but inside there was this ferocious competitor.
But by the late 1980s, life at home was less than perfect.
My mother and father were definitely going in 2 different directions. As with any 2 people, sometimes you just grow apart.
It ended up being a very difficult divorce. There were hard feelings between the 2 of them.
There was concerns about finances, about how much alimony he was going to have to pay. I think they went to court several times to debate those issues.
My sister was in high school. I was leaving for the military. So they did live in Torrington for several years after the divorce.
But after Lisa graduated high school in 1990, Rita and her daughter decided they wanted a fresh start.
Rita's brother and sister-in-law happened to live in South Florida, so she decided to move down there with Lisa so they could be close to family.
In 1991, Rita and Lisa moved in with her brother Tom and his wife Karen in Boynton Beach.
They were a bit naive of the world, and they needed someone to kind of get them established, which my aunt and uncle did a wonderful job.
Rita soon found work as a cashier at a department store in Delray Beach, while Lisa pursued her passion for cooking at a local culinary institute.
Lisa went to the local culinary institute and also worked at a restaurant called Charlie's Crab. She was a pastry chef.
She had dreams of possibly becoming like a pastry chef on a cruise ship and being able to travel.
In November 1991, Rita and Lisa were able to rent their own apartment, a 2-bedroom ground floor unit in the Runaway Bay complex in Lantana.
It was liberating for them, and they really looked forward to what the future was going to bring for them.
But now Rita and Lisa have become the casualties of a gruesome murder. Deputies quickly notified detectives.
It kind of shook us up a little bit because we didn't have many double homicides of a mother and daughter, and it was horrific.
With only 2 days until landfall, Hurricane Andrew is a ticking time bomb. Once it hits, disaster is imminent. Wind and rain will bring massive flooding, communication lines will be down and residents will be fleeing. For investigators, that could mean a case mired in chaos, or worse, stopped dead in its tracks. Palm Beach authorities must solve a grisly double murder amidst one of the worst hurricanes ever to hit the state of Florida.
Elements of a Category 5. Houses are blown clean off their foundations. People lose their lives in those storms.
To have such a horrible crime occur and at the same time as a devastating hurricane, it's just unparalleled.
In August 1992, Hurricane Andrew intensifies in the Atlantic as it barrels straight towards the Florida peninsula.
The wind shear was dropping, and a high-pressure system pushed the storm west, and it accelerated. Expected to hit around Palm Beach County, a hurricane watch was issued from Central Florida all the way down to the Florida Keys.
Meanwhile, Palm Beach County police have discovered the bloody bodies of 45-year-old Rita Beto and her 20-year-old daughter, Lisa, brutally murdered in their apartment. Rita's brother and sister-in-law deliver the heartbreaking news to Rita's son.
And I remember the phone rang, and I don't remember much afterwards. I remember just sitting down on the couch, just sitting forever. It seemed like hours. I didn't say a word. I was just in total shock.
A hurricane watch is in effect as Palm Beach County homicide investigators arrive at the crime scene. They immediately begin to identify and collect forensic evidence.
There was no obvious indications of forced entry, no broken door jamb, no pried locks, no forced open windows.
They could tell right away that there had been some kind of struggle in the living room because several items had been broken.
It was apparent that there had been a television on a stand. You could see the dust around where it had been. They surmised that there was possibly a VCR missing.
The cabinets in the kitchen are open but not ransacked. The smaller bedroom has also been combed through. But in the primary bedroom, a disturbing scene awaits.
Lisa Beto was on top of the bed. She was nude. Her head was covered by a living room pillow. Her mother was lying on the ground, face down on the floor, and she was wearing some type of nightdress.
It appeared as if someone had held her by the legs and pulled her backwards. Her arms were outstretched in front of her, and there was a puddle of blood in front of her head.
There is another large puddle of blood beside Lisa on the bed. As if she was moved, it appears she was sexually assaulted.
Both women had been shot in the head. The culprit had used the living room pillow that was on Lisa's head in the effort to muzzle the sound of the gunshot. There were signs of that some type of instrument was used to restrain their wrists and legs, but the ligature itself was not found.
And they locate no weapon.
But they did find Rita's purse in the bedroom. Her keys and wallet were there. There was no cash in the wallet, but Lisa's purse and wallet and keys were not found.
The phone line had been cut, and there is blood spatter on the walls and window.
There was some cigarettes that had been smoked at the crime scene and put out in the carpet.
They believed these must belong to the killer by the way they were just crushed into the carpet.
Forensic technicians collect 5 cigarette butts, several pubic hairs on the bedspread, as well as multiple fingerprints throughout the apartment.
It was what appeared to be a home invasion robbery that turned tragic. But there's some level of planning necessary to be able to control 2 victims. So I believe that the culprit brought a weapon and brought whatever he used to restrain the 2 women.
But with no forced entry, detectives wonder if the killings were committed by an individual who somehow knew Rita and Lisa.
While Hurricane Andrew gets stronger and closer with each passing moment, detectives in Palm Beach County, Florida are investigating the double homicide of Rita Beto and her daughter Lisa.
This was a particularly gruesome case. They were both found shot in the head in the master bedroom, possibly sexually assaulted and tortured.
Everybody is worried about the hurricane. The storm is continuing to go towards Palm Beach County, and the detectives were just doing the best that they could. But your potential avenues that you can investigate get limited. People aren't in town, the weather's bad, resources are stretched thin.
As the bodies are removed for an autopsy, detectives turn to Rita's brother Tom and his wife Karen.
He confirms that neither Rita or Lisa smoked, and Rita wouldn't permit smoking in the house.
After confirming their 19-inch TV and VCR are missing from the apartment, he also points out that Lisa's car is not there.
The car wasn't in the parking lot. And so we pretty quickly put out a be on the lookout for a stolen automobile.
Police ask if there is anyone that might want to hurt either of the victims.
Tom and Karen gave us what information they could, but they just had no idea who would do this.
Investigators press to gather evidence at the scene, search for Lisa's car, and question neighbors in the apartment complex as Hurricane Andrew continues to gain momentum.
The morning of August 23rd, the hurricane watch in South Florida was upgraded to a warning. By midday, Andrew reached Category 5 status with sustained winds of 175 miles an hour, and it was headed towards the Bahamas.
Hurricane Andrew was predicted to hit Palm Beach County. So the sheriff's office was already in preparation to handle all of the things that come along with a major Category 5 hurricane in a densely populated area.
Mandatory evacuations are ordered for coastal cities, low-lying areas, and mobile home parks. In Palm Beach County, over 200,000 people flee their homes.
The southbound lanes of major thoroughfares were turned into northbound lanes, so you couldn't go south.
On I-95, bumper-to-bumper traffic is reported for more than 200 miles and is regarded as the largest traffic jam in the history of Florida at the time. Investigators worry just how much this will impact their investigation.
The chaos can provide cover for your suspect to get away, for evidence to disappear.
Detectives try to speak with potential witnesses from the Beto's jobs, friends, and family, but many have already left town or are busy preparing for the storm.
You do have to worry about losing evidence. During this time, you've got people who evacuate. So it does make it a lot harder. It makes it harder to find people.
It slowed things down. The autopsies were slowed down because of the pending hurricane.
To make things worse for the case, the sheriff's office must shift focus and put all their resources towards helping the community.
When a significant storm is coming your way, law enforcement goes into another gear, really.
Preparations are going on, resources are stretched thin, the weather's starting to deteriorate. It's all hands on deck.
Despite the chaos, police remain steadfast, determined to find Lisa's car.
Crime like this is not taken lightly. This was by far the worst. So we were determined to keep working it. The investigators knew that Lisa's car was missing. We knew her purse, her wallet, and her keys had not been located inside the apartment.
Then, detectives get word that Lisa's vehicle was found in the store parking lot that was swamped with people trying to prepare for the hurricane, so the car would have blended right in.
The car was located by law enforcement officers who happened to be driving through the parking lot where the car was abandoned.
Investigators rushed to the location, less than 3 miles from the murder scene.
The seat was pushed forward to allow the culprit to put that big 19-inch television set in the back and close the hatch.
Lisa's wallet with her ID and her keys were left in the car.
The sheriff's office towed it to the crime scene garage where it was eventually processed.
And just in the nick of time,
They were able to get it to the crime scene garage before the weather turned. And then Andrew, it wasn't supposed to go south to Miami, and at the last second, it made a turn to the left.
As the hurricane engulfs South Florida, authorities in Palm Beach send resources while their streets fill with those fleeing Andrew's wrath. The investigation stalls as Andrew makes landfall, and all of southern Florida spirals into turmoil. Less than 2 days into the investigation of the cold-blooded murders of Rita and Lisa Beto, Hurricane Andrew is just hours away from hitting southern Florida as a Category 5 hurricane. And detectives know the storm is bound to throw a wrench into the works.
At the time, Category 5 hurricanes had sustained winds of over 156 miles an hour. Andrew's winds were clocked at 175 miles an hour, which is devastating.
200,000 Palm Beach County residents evacuate the area. Could the killer be one of them? Detectives cling to the hope that they will find the murderer in the midst.
To think that there's somebody out there who did it and we haven't caught them, we don't even know who they are. It was unsettling.
At 5 a.m. on Monday morning, Hurricane Andrew crashes into Dade County south of Miami, leaving a path of destruction in its wake.
The damage was enormous, more from the wind than the rain. The winds were 165 miles an hour with gusts even stronger than that, and storm surge was around 15 feet.
There's a lot of tree limbs down, palm fronds down, stores not being open, not being able to find water, not being able to find generators.
More than 1.4 million people lose power, and hundreds of thousands of people are homeless. The area is in shambles.
If you go and look at the photographs of Homestead, it just looks like it was just scraped off the earth. No one thought that, apartments would be leveled.
Detectives are heartbroken and find themselves struggling to keep the case alive.
We knew that our resources were going to go south to help everyone affected down there.
The people who got the direct hit had nowhere to live, and so they all started migrating to Palm Beach County.
The hurricane has also overshadowed the murders in the media.
In a normal day-to-day, this double murder would have been headline news, but it kind of fell to the back. People's attentions was focused elsewhere.
We were concerned that we might not get tips that otherwise we would receive. So yeah, it kind of shook us up a little bit because we didn't have many double homicides of a mother and daughter.
While the state works to recover, detectives jump right back in as quickly as they can.
The detectives just kept going. They didn't stop. The last thing you want as an investigator is an unsolved case. You want that clearance. You want to give the family some comfort in knowing at least who did it and why. And they didn't stop.
After 24 hours of delays due to Andrew, an autopsy is finally performed on Rita and Lisa Beto.
The medical examiner's office, their power system was running on a generator, but the urgency of getting the information to the detectives about the autopsy was pretty urgent.
The medical examiner confirms both women died from gunshot wounds to the head by a .22 caliber.
Lisa was sexually assaulted. She had been battered as well. There were some bruises on her body. Unfortunately, there was no DNA material recovered from the sexual assault kit.
Even though the rape kit did not reveal any semen, evidence at the crime scene does.
There was semen found on a towel on the floor, but it didn't have any protein in it by the time it was examined, so it was not of comparison value.
Detectives have to rely on the forensic results from the pubic hairs and cigarette butts found.
We found 5 cigarette butts, and 3 of them contained DNA.
Unfortunately, there are no matches in the system because DNA collection was fairly new and mostly local at the time.
There's some unidentified fingerprints in this crime scene. We had pubic hairs within the murder scene from an unknown contributor. So we hoped that eventually a suspect would be identified and then we could make a comparison then.
Even after Lisa's car is fully examined, they are no closer to finding the identity of the killer.
So there really was not a lot of evidentiary value within the car.
Investigators continue to speak with potential witnesses, focusing on Lisa.
We knew Lisa was more of a potential target than her mother just because she was out and about more.
The detectives interviewed her classmates to get a sense of who her friends were, who were associates.
It took a while to get all of the neighbors back in town, all of the coworkers and tennis partners and schoolmates back in town so you could talk to them.
Detectives start with the last time Lisa had been seen alive and work backwards.
She had had dinner with a coworker at about 10 o'clock that Friday night. After they finished dinner, he drove her to her vehicle in the parking lot. He saw her get in her car, and then he left. That's the last time anyone saw Lisa alive.
And police learned that Lisa was well liked. There was no animosity with anyone. There wasn't anyone that had any issues with her. She was a quiet girl who kept to herself.
Rita had worked that day, so she had gotten off work in the afternoon and was in the apartment, as far as anyone knew.
When they speak with Rita's son, Alan, they get a possible lead.
Alan actually was the one who pointed to his father and said, "You may want to check out my dad."
Rita had a real bitter divorce with her ex-husband, James, and even Lisa didn't have much of a relationship with her father.
The family traveled down to Florida, and Alan traveled with his dad and said his dad had made some concerning statements.
My father was very giddy and happy, which I thought was very unusual for, okay, his ex-wife is dead, okay, but also his daughter's dead, and in a horrific way. I found that to be very suspicious, and I'm the one who let the police know about that.
Could James Beto have had something to do with their murders?
Anytime a contentious divorce results in a murder, the law enforcement looks at the husband as a possible participant.
We were eager to pounce on any potential lead because this was such a heinous crime.
But police soon discover that Beto has an alibi.
He was in Connecticut, and that was verified. But there was some suspicion that maybe he had colluded with someone else to commit the crime on his behalf, so he wouldn't have to pay alimony any longer.
And one of the detectives took that and ran and did a very thorough investigation of James, and it never amounted to anything.
Perhaps it was just his way of handling the situation. You know, everybody handles things differently.
As a homicide detective, you need to not only find the guilty, but kind of eliminate the innocent.
Investigators find themselves at a loss. They are forced to look elsewhere for clues. But where and how? The investigation into the Beto murders slows to a standstill.
I was convinced that if I could identify who smoked those cigarettes, that I would be able to identify the killer.
Hurricane Andrew upended the lives of millions in August of 1992.
After Hurricane Andrew passed through, the whole community of South Florida felt the impact. No electricity, streetlights were down, just gasoline was in short supply. The people who got the direct hit had nowhere to live.
The hurricane also disrupted the investigation into the murders of 45-year-old Rita Beto and her 20-year-old daughter, Lisa.
Hurricane Andrew certainly played a role in this overall investigation. It was an obstacle, certainly. It slowed things down.
With no main suspect, Palm Beach County investigators compared DNA from the cigarette butts found at the scene to every potential person of interest.
We started getting saliva samples from people who we were interviewing just to rule them out.
Thousands of people are eliminated.
You would think that you would get a solid path of investigation, that someone would come up as a good suspect. That didn't happen.
The months slowly turn into years. The family holds out hope that police will eventually find Rita and Lisa's murderer.
I want to know why. Why would anybody do this to two innocent people who were just looking to make a new start in life?
The case goes cold, but it's not completely shelved, and Hurricane Andrew is about to rear its head again in an unexpectedly good way. After several years, Detective Gary Martin takes over the case.
The case was at the top of the list as far as cold cases go in Palm Beach County. I was convinced that if I could identify who smoked those cigarettes, that I would be able to identify the killer.
Detective Martin interviews everyone he can, using Hurricane Andrew as a marker.
I was able to use the hurricane as kind of a frame of reference. It helped people kind of refresh their memory. Where were you when the hurricane was coming? What do you remember?
With each interview, Martin takes DNA samples. DNA technology has advanced considerably in the years since the murder.
I was going around to everybody who had any connection to either Rita or Lisa and sticking a swab in their mouth.
They put the DNA profile from the cigarettes into a new DNA database called CODIS.
I was hoping that the database would continue to grow from offenders from all over the country.
4 years later, investigators get word they have a DNA match.
A correctional facility in Wisconsin, in a routine check of their inmates' DNA, in a comparison that they do, one of their inmates had matched the DNA submitted in our case.
The match is to a 41-year-old man named James Frederick, who is serving time for armed robbery.
He was kind of a transient person and had an extensive criminal history of robbery, burglary, attempted homicide, escape, narcotics, auto theft, you name it.
In 1992, James Frederick was in Palm Beach County Jail, and he was released in July. He was out of jail and in the general vicinity of where the murders took place.
Investigators learn he'd been in jail in Palm Beach County on cocaine charges and resisting arrest, but his DNA was not collected at the time.
The Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office had had him in custody until a month before these homicides.
The day after Rita and Lisa's bodies were discovered, he was a suspect in this robbery and shooting that occurred at a local motel. The .22 caliber pistol was used in both the hotel robbery as well as the murder of both Rita and Lisa Beto.
But Frederick had fled the area before the hurricane hit. Detectives learn he has been incarcerated in Wisconsin since 1995.
I went about talking to everyone that I could who had a relationship with James Frederick while he was in South Florida.
You had some recollection of an ex-boyfriend whom you've identified by photograph for us as James Frederick. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
And the relationship occurred sometime, it started, as I understand, about a year before Hurricane Andrew.
Yes, sir.
His girlfriend gave me a lot of detail about his demeanor, his mental state, his drug addiction, his propensity for violence.
She even witnessed Frederick arrive at her home with an unfamiliar car.
You had the impression that he had stolen property in this black car when he drove out?
Yes, I did. I believe there was a TV there. It could have been a VCR.
I eventually spoke with his brother, who confirmed that he was in South Florida, in Palm Beach County, armed with a .22 caliber firearm at the time of this crime.
Detectives are confident they have found their man, but they need a stronger link to tie Frederick to the murders. It's time to confront him face to face.
He was in custody in Wisconsin. He had already been sentenced, so he had a lengthy prison sentence in front of him. So I flew to Wisconsin to interview him.
Detective Martin sits down with Frederick.
I question him about his activities in South Florida. Think back to Hurricane Andrew. Where were you? What were you doing?
He admits to several of his crimes in Florida in 1992.
He told me that at that time he was severely addicted to crack cocaine. He told me that he robbed and burglarized a lot of people to get money to support his habit. He denied ever killing anyone. He denied ever shooting anyone.
He denied knowing either Rita or Lisa, or ever driving their car or being in their apartment.
Detectives then serve him with a warrant to obtain DNA samples.
The DNA technology was such that we needed the literal blood from his arm to make the final comparison. And then I asked him, did he have anything else he wanted to say? And he said, I guess I'm going to Florida.
Frederick's DNA is tested against the cigarette butts and the pubic hairs found at the crime scene. And they're both a match.
James Frederick was the person whose saliva was on those cigarette butts. The mitochondrial components of the hairs, that DNA matched James Frederick. I was convinced from then that he was the killer.
After a decade, James Anthony Frederick is charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, burglary, 2 counts of kidnapping, sexual battery, and grand theft.
When I found out he was arrested, there was no joy. There was no excitement. There was no anger that it took so long. It was an empty feeling.
Although Frederick isn't talking, investigators believe they know what really happened the night of August 21st, 1992.
While everyone was preoccupied with Hurricane Andrew, Frederick was on the prowl looking for a way to support his drug habit, and he had a .22.
I think he may have seen Lisa Beto just at a happenstance somewhere on the road and followed her. I think he confronted her as she got out of the car and started walking to her door.
She used her key to open the door, and the two of them went in. He then forced them both to surrender to him.
And he used some type of either a belt or a rope or zip ties or something to restrain both women. I think he then spent a short time searching the home, asking them for valuables or for money. He ordered Rita to the back bedroom, had her lie on the ground. He then carried Lisa.
Frederick likely then threw Lisa on the bed and removed her clothes.
He sexually assaulted her and then shot her in the head through the pillow, shot the mother in the head through the pillow.
When you think about it, one of them saw the other one killed, and that's upsetting to anyone.
He then took off their restraints and loaded Lisa's car up with stolen goods he could sell for drug money.
Everybody's doing things that are different than their usual pattern of behavior. So maybe seeing somebody with a 19-inch television set doesn't gather anybody's attention. The day goes by to the next day. He decides he needs to leave South Florida before the hurricane comes.
After bringing the items to his place, he just dumps the car near where he was living at the time so he could walk back.
It appears that this was just what we feared. It was a random act. It was a senseless act, and that's why it was so hard to catch.
Frederick moves to Wisconsin, where he is arrested for armed robbery 3 years later, and his DNA is finally tested. Then in 2005, James Frederick is indicted by a grand jury and pleads guilty to avoid the death penalty. He receives 2 life sentences.
Fredericks is in custody in Wisconsin until 2065. If he were ever to be released in Wisconsin, then he is held on Florida charges for this case. So, God willing, he'll never be free man again.
Rita and Lisa Beto's loved ones will never understand the senselessness of their murders.
He destroyed my two family members' lives in a way that was just horrible. They didn't deserve to die like that. Cold, callous, just wasn't right.
The tragedy will always live in the shadow of Hurricane Andrew.
Hurricane Andrew and the Beto murders are forever linked in my mind. I don't think of one without remembering the other.
During the rainy season in southern Minnesota, an unidentified female body is discovered near the rural city of Blue Earth.
There were very heavy rains at that time. I mean, I'm talking 5 to 6 inches overnight.
A farmer had discovered this body in a drainage ditch.
Who is this person? You know, where did she come from?
At the same time, 1,200 miles away, a young woman vanishes from Texas.
The family had never given up looking for her. They hoped someday to find her.
This was back in 1980. The resources, the technology, extremely limited. They really didn't have much to go on.
But as multiple seasons come and go, will the spring rains of Minnesota be the key to solving both cases?
The weather can change anything. In this case, it changed everything for the better.
The small rustic city of Blue Earth in Faribault County, Minnesota, is just 2 hours south of the Minneapolis-St. Paul metropolitan area.
We're a very small county, about 14,000 population. We're right on the south edge of Minnesota, right on the North Iowa border.
It's a wonderful little town. We have a feeling of security and it being safe. Many people, myself included, rarely lock our home.
Most everybody in town knows everybody, and there's really very few secrets. You go to the coffee shop and you'll hear all kinds of gossip for the day.
The county is largely rural and devoted mainly to agriculture.
Faribault County is blessed with some very rich soil. The main crops are corn and soybeans.
That's because of Minnesota's location in the center of North America. It experiences some of the widest variety of weather in the United States.
Minnesota finds itself at a climate crossroads, basically influenced by a wide variety of air masses. In the winters, you've got Arctic air that can spill over the entire state, keeping temps below freezing for days at a time. But in the summer, you've got that warm, humid air, and that can encroach from the south.
The weather can get hot. We can hit 100 degrees. Most of the time, we're in the 80s for the high temperatures, and we really deal a lot with rain.
Minnesota can receive 2/3 of their annual precipitation from the month of April till December, ultimately helping crops flourish.
People that live in town are relying on the farmers to have a good year, and the farmers are relying on the crops and the weather to have a good year.
But the area is also prone to flooding because of the many waterways and rivers that run throughout, combined with snowmelt runoff.
We can get an all-day rain, or we can get just a quick-moving thunderstorm that goes through, and it can dump a lot of rain fast and heavy with lightning and hail even.
To prevent heavy rains from flooding the farms and destroying many of their crops, lots of farmers rely on these drainage ditches to protect their lands.
There's ditches that run throughout the county, and they feed into the rivers, and that helps drain off the fields. Most of the ditches are probably 10 to 15 feet deep and 30 feet wide.
And May of 1980, heavy rain saturated the land, raising water levels, filling drainage ditches, and threatening crops.
It rained quite a bit, something like 10 inches that month, and the heat and everything was quite bad as well.
That same month, 1,200 miles away, a beloved teenager disappears without a trace. The local sheriff's department gets a call from a man named Don Boucher, who is worried about his daughter, Michelle.
She was an 18-year-old female from Bay City, Texas. I think her dad was like a Gulf fisherman.
Mr. Boucher tells police that the last time he saw Michelle was back in December. That was 5 months earlier, and since then she had been traveling.
She was exploring life. She wasn't a runaway. She was calling home regularly.
But then he says the phone call stopped, and he has no idea where she is. Michelle Yvette Boucher was born on November 2nd, 1961.
Michelle was a beautiful girl, a romantic at heart. She loved girly things. She constantly talked about her future wedding and what it would be like.
But Michelle's family life was far from ideal.
There was an issue at home with the father and the mother, and they were splitting, and the mother moved away.
Her parents divorced when the kids were young. Her dad lived in Texas. Her mother remarried and raised the kids in Louisiana.
Their upbringing was strict, and the children were homeschooled.
Because of this, they were extremely isolated with little to no friends at all. They weren't allowed to socialize with other kids their age very much. So as Michelle got older, she started to rebel.
She was a free spirit, and she wanted to go wander around.
Michelle wanted to live life to the fullest and was known to push her limits. At 18 years old, she decided to leave home.
She was kind of like a free spirit, wanted to spread her wings.
It wasn't long at all before Michelle was picked up over 1,000 miles away in Colorado by the police there, hitchhiking on a busy highway. It was then that police contacted her father.
He had driven somewhere and picked her up because she wanted to come home, and he brought her home.
He took her to live with him. He resided in Bay City, Texas. It was there that everybody had hoped that Michelle would be happier, but she was still rebellious, and she often fought with her father.
Then, in December of 1979, Michelle got into a heated argument with her father. She packed her bags and headed out of town again. Frustrated with the constant battles, he didn't stop her.
It was different then. People they weren't necessarily runaways. They were just out soul searching or something. I suspect that she was living the adventure.
Young people, their minds aren't, 18 is legal age, but your minds aren't completely formed.
Mr. Boucher tells police that he had been receiving collect calls from Michelle from January through May of 1980, so he was able to keep track of her during that time.
They thought she was headed west, Colorado or the West Coast.
Back then, we didn't have cell phones, and so she was calling collect or whatever, payphone. And so they were still in contact. They weren't estranged or anything.
But in May of 1980, when the charges stopped, Mr. Boucher got worried. That's when he called the police. After speaking to Michelle's dad, Matagorda County Police in Texas add Michelle's information to their database of missing persons and spread the word.
Well, keep in mind, this was the 1980s. This stuff only went so far, and they didn't have those national databases that we have today.
As police in Texas look for Michelle Boucher, investigators 5 states north in Minnesota make a gruesome discovery, thanks to the wet, rainy spring season.
If it had not rained like it did, they might never have found it.
It could be a completely different scenario if it was wintertime. Weather changes everything.
1980, Matagorda County, Texas police are looking for 18-year-old Michelle Boucher, who left home in December.
The family had not heard from her in weeks, and she was regularly calling home. Then the calls just suddenly stopped.
They eventually filed a missing persons report, but it was not right away because they thought she was off on an adventure.
1,200 miles north, Blue Earth, Minnesota is experiencing a very wet spring season.
In this part of the country, in late May and into June, it's common to have strong thunderstorm complexes roll through, especially during the overnight hours. And on May 29th, that's exactly what happened, with over 5 inches of rain falling.
The weather at that time was heavy rain, very heavy rain, at the end of May, 1980.
And in the wake of these severe showers, a local farmer makes a discovery he'll never forget. As the storm moves away from Faribault County, police get an unusual call from a local farmer.
He says he thinks he found a body in a flooded ditch by his farm.
He was basically checking the drainage ditch or waterway because it had become clogged up after heavy rains.
And he was trying to get that cleaned out, unplugged, and he noticed that what he thought was a doll floating in the water with corn stalks. And after looking at it, he said, "It's not a doll, it's a human." And he called our office.
The sheriff and 2 deputies arrived to the area just east of Blue Earth off Interstate 90.
And they see the nude body of a woman floating face up in the drainage ditch among the debris.
First thing that went through my head was to get the body out and see if we could find any evidence at all.
The fire department and a team of investigators arrive on the scene.
Blue Earth Fire Department came out with a basket and went in the water. The water was probably at the most up to armpit height. They pulled the body out.
Once the body is on dry land, police take a closer look.
The body was in really bad shape. It was completely unrecognizable. It was in a pretty advanced stage of decomposition.
She'd been there long enough, the body had bloated. The water will have some effect on the body, and the temperature, the heat causes it to expand.
But it's clearly not a natural death.
They see some type of cord tied tight around her neck, like the cord of a drawstring from a sweatshirt or a jacket or something like that. And that was all that was with her. She had no clothing, no jewelry, just this cord, and that was it.
While the body is carefully removed for the post-mortem examination, police comb through the debris in the ditch and the surrounding areas, looking for any clues to the victim's identity or her killer.
We walked up and down the bank looking for any kind of clothing, tire tracks, anything.
But the heavy rains of the night before haven't done them any favors.
Well, with an outdoor crime scene, the weather works against you. Had there been clothing thrown in the ditch with her, either washed away or never was there. If there was any kind of tracks, tire tracks, foot tracks, anything at all, would have been washed away.
Next, police questioned the farmer who found the body and learned that the day before, he had checked the same ditch.
The farmer said prior to the heavy rains, the water in that very same ditch was only 4 to 6 inches deep, and there was no body. So one of the theories was that she was actually put in one place and had floated because of so much rain.
It was important to find out, was she dumped at this location where she was caught, or was it a different location?
We have the rain, and so the drainage ditch filled up and was flowing a bit probably, and so it washed her out.
Then she got entrapped with the corn stalks and the other debris in the waterway, and truly her body could have floated on and on and on and never been found.
Suspecting she may have been put into the ditch elsewhere, investigators broaden their search. They canvass the area, and conduct aerial searches from a helicopter, looking for any clues as to where she may have come from.
They didn't know where she went in. The local authorities searched the riverbanks. They went like a mile up and a mile down from where she was found to see if they could find any sort of evidence, but there was absolutely nothing.
Investigators assume the killer must be a local familiar with the area.
We thought originally it was probably someone passing through the area, but it's not really accessible from I-90, even though it's near I-90. It's basically farmland out there.
There's not a lot of traffic in that area. Strictly farming, houses are maybe a quarter, eighth mile apart.
Back at the sheriff's office, the law enforcement team reaches out to surrounding agencies to see if there are any missing persons reports that match their victim.
She was found nude. She had no identification at all on her. There was no evidence at all.
But investigators are hopeful that an autopsy may provide them with a clue to her identity. Despite the advanced decomposition from the heat and water, the medical examiner is able to confirm that the body is a white female.
They had no idea how old this person was. They eventually guessed it was a female between 25, 35 years old.
He indicated that the apparent cause of death was strangulation due to a ligature on her neck.
He also notices the victim's feet are heavily calloused.
I think they pointed that basically this person is a hitchhiker and probably has done a lot of traveling on her feet.
A rape exam is performed, but unfortunately, due to the condition of the body, nothing is found, and the medical examiner can only estimate her time of death.
They didn't know how long she had laid in the water. They estimated a week or 5 days, but they really just didn't know. There was very little evidence to go on because of the weather.
And getting fingerprints are nearly impossible. Only her left thumbprint is viable. But in the process of lifting the print, the medical examiner makes a disturbing discovery.
Her fingernails were pulled out bilaterally, like what you'd use pliers or vice grips or something of that nature to pull them out.
That indicated to the officers at the time that she'd been tortured, probably when she was still alive.
Somebody who would inflict that pain on another is obviously a sick individual.
There are no other identifying marks to help with the ID.
There was no tattoos, no markings on her body. Our only lead was the teeth.
The medical examiner takes detailed x-rays and photographs of her mouth and skull.
Her teeth were very well maintained. She obviously had some sort of dental care, so one would have to assume that somebody had cared about her.
It was one of our biggest hopes was that the dental records would eventually prove out.
Since they didn't know who she was, she was labeled a Jane Doe.
Back at the sheriff's office, investigators focus on any and all missing females.
There wasn't anybody missing within our county or neighboring counties, and so it truly was a suspicious death and identified person, and who was this person, and nobody really knew.
They used the x-rays of her skull to draw a composite sketch and send out teletypes.
They didn't have a name for her, didn't know who she was. There was a composite sketch, but it's the best that they could do at the time.
Everything that was available to us to put it out nationally, photos of her teeth, the drawing that we had.
At first, there were a ton of departments sending out messages saying, we have missing girls here, we have missing girls there.
Every lead you get, you think, oh boy, I got something, but ended up with box after box full of leads and dead ends and dead end after dead end after dead end.
Meanwhile, as investigators try desperately to hone in on Jane Doe's killer, the Blue Earth community is on edge.
We very seldom have a murder. In the 16 years that I was sheriff, this was the only murder that we had.
I can only imagine there was definitely concern, especially for the young women and the kids in the community, because they didn't have any idea of who did it.
Months after she's found, the Blue Earth Jane Doe is laid to rest in a local cemetery.
Her stone said unidentified female, found May 30th, 1980, and then it gave a brief description of the location where she was found.
But investigators refused to give up.
We still kept the case open, trying to find out who Jane Doe was.
5 states away, it's been more than a month since Michelle Boucher's family in Texas last heard anything from her, and investigators have few leads to her whereabouts.
The way missing and unidentified cases are handled today is much more aggressive than it used to be. Today we have a greater technology. We also have better communication taking place between states.
I think they followed up any leads, but just nothing had come. You know, they didn't have anything. She just disappeared.
As the Texas missing persons case goes cold, Minnesota police learn of a potential suspect who may have killed their Jane Doe.
He admitted to killing at least 60 women.
Police in Texas have still not found 18-year-old Michelle Boucher, who has been missing now for almost 2 months, and the case has grown cold.
Michelle had left home to hitchhike across the country. This was 1980. The police in Texas did everything they could, but there was really just no easy way to track people living off the grid.
Her sister, her father, and the family had never given up looking for her. They hoped someday to find her.
At the same time in Minnesota, Faribault County Police have followed hundreds of leads in an effort to identify the Blue Earth Jane Doe, whose body washed up in a ditch after heavy rains.
The sheriff's department interviewed hundreds of people and chased down leads of all kinds to try to shed some light on what had happened, and they really just didn't have any luck at all.
3 years go by without a solid lead. Then one day, a call comes in from Texas. Investigators learned that an infamous serial killer named Henry Lee Lucas has been saying some interesting things while incarcerated in Montague, Texas.
Henry Lucas would pick up hitchhiking gals at truck stops, and he had hatred for women, I guess. And he covered the whole United States, basically. And he got arrested.
He would stab them. He would strangle them. He would take all of their clothes so there would be no form of identification. Then he would dump their bodies.
Lucas was convicted of murdering his mother in 1960 and 2 other women in 1983, but he said there were more.
Henry Lee Lucas admitted to killing at least 60 women, and he freely admitted all. He was very talkative.
Texas authorities tell Faribault County investigators that he's confessed to a murder up in the Rochester area of Minnesota in 1980.
Rochester is about 100 miles east of Blue Earth on I-90. That's the same interstate Jane Doe was found.
Feeling hopeful, Faribault County detectives quickly head to Montague, Texas to speak with Lucas face-to-face.
Henry Lucas said he couldn't really even say whether he had or hadn't. He interviewed him several times. He couldn't even remember every place he'd been and killed somebody.
But he said, I did kill a gal near Rochester. In fact, I still have her locket. But he said, if she wasn't stabbed, I didn't do it.
But knowing their Jane Doe was strangled, not stabbed, they begin to lose hope. Lucas might not be their man after all.
This guy was talking and confessing to anything and everything. He really just liked the attention.
He was a prime suspect for about a week until it got proven otherwise.
Minnesota detectives find themselves back to square one.
They were very disappointed that that hadn't panned out. And some people eventually got to thinking that we're never going to know. You know, we just won't ever know.
5 more years go by, and both the Minnesota Blue Earth Jane Doe murder case and the Texas missing persons case of Michelle Boucher run out of leads.
Basically, it did go cold. You didn't hear anything about it for a long time, just like it disappeared in the wind.
Although police in Texas have all but closed the book on Michelle's disappearance, investigators in Minnesota are about to get a huge tip in their Jane Doe murder case, and it shocks the entire police force.
About 1988, big news hit that somebody confessed to killing this person.
That was stunning, and stunning to find out who did it.
The Faribault County Sheriff's Office gets a call from a police lieutenant in Smith County, Texas.
And he said, hey, I've got somebody down here that's talking about a murder that he committed. Do you have a murder in your area that's unsolved? And we said, well, yeah, we do.
They say he's a 42-year-old man they have in custody.
He was in prison in Texas for child molestation. He had basically turned himself in for that.
And he said, well, this guy says he strangled a gal up in your area.
The man's name is Robert Leroy Nelson. Faribault County investigators are shocked. The name is one they know.
Robert Leroy Nelson was a Minnesota State Trooper that was assigned to this district, which he would have traveled all of Faribault County state and county roads, and he would have covered the area in 1980 when Jane Doe was found.
They knew the guy. They knew who he was, and when he was a highway patrolman in this area. So it was stunning.
But then I think a lot of things started to make sense where people are like, yeah, I can see this.
He was very strange. He was very meticulous. He had a temper, a bad temper, we knew that.
Police decide to make another trip to Texas. Investigators from Faribault County and the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension visit Nelson in prison. They wonder why he would suddenly confess to this murder.
I believe he was hoping to serve his prison time in Minnesota for the Texas crime.
Minnesota prisons are a little easier than Texas prison. Basically, I had nothing to lose, nothing to gain. We said, well, okay, tell us how you did it.
According to Nelson, he was on patrol duty just off the I-90 exit ramp on or about the night of May 26, 1980, 4 days before their Jane Doe was discovered.
He was watching the cars go by, and he said, I watched this one pull up. They came up the ramp, stopped, pushed some gal out, and then took off.
And so he said, I went over to her and said, what's happening? She said they had gotten into a fight. So he said, well, I'll give you a ride into Blue Earth.
The young woman readily accepted the lift.
It's a state trooper, you know. What can be safer?
So he said, I took her into Blue Earth. And as we got to the edge of Blue Earth, we started talking about maybe she could have sex with me.
He took her back out into the country. He had this place he knew of. It was this little gravel road that was pretty hidden from view.
He stopped in a grass field area just off County Road 11, and that's where everything took place.
As Nelson continues to talk, investigators realize he may just be the man they've been looking for all these years. That's not all. Nelson's timeline matches that of another familiar case. Could it be possible that their Jane Doe is Michelle Boucher?
We don't know who she is yet.
On May 30th, 1980, in Faribault County, Minnesota, An unidentified female was found dead in a flooded drainage ditch after heavy rains brought her body to the surface. Now, 8 years later, investigators are speaking to a man who says he's her killer, former state trooper Robert Nelson.
Obviously, it goes without saying, nobody wants it to be law enforcement. That would look bad for the entire operation.
While continuing to speak with the ex-state trooper, police notice everything seems to be lining up with the evidence.
He said that he saw her get out of a van and followed her and picked her up. He took her back into Blue Earth and then took her back out into the country.
But he claims that once he got the young girl to the private field for sex, she changed her mind.
He said she started to back out. He had gotten angry. He forced her to strip. He cuffed her behind her back. Then he sexually assaulted her. She fought him, screaming, and she just wouldn't be quiet.
He said she threatened to turn me in for doing that. She had threatened to expose him, and she said I started threatening her, and he was trying to get her to stop doing that. And one thing led to another. And eventually he said, pulled her fingernails out with a pair of pliers.
When the torture didn't work, he claims that he snapped.
He had taken her coat string and strangled her then. She was on her knees.
Police feel confident Nelson is their guy.
Robert Nelson was able to discuss details of the crime that he wouldn't have known unless he was the killer.
Once she was dead, Nelson says he dumped her body into a remote drainage ditch.
This area where the body was disposed of was along I-90, about 3 miles east of Blue Earth. According to his statement, there really wasn't much water in the ditch when he pushed the body in. So it was prior to the storms on May 29th.
I think his hope was that it never be found where he dumped her. Nobody would have found that body down in that ditch.
But luckily, the weather that day changed his plans.
Excess rain can cause flooding, which then can cause strong currents, and it can cause that even in the smallest waterways, like a drainage ditch.
The murder was committed about 2 miles away, and the body floated through the ditches and underneath I-90.
Having the downpours, the amount of rain, heavy flooding we had, basically surfaced her body from the dump site, and she is able to wash up to this culvert.
So without the weather, no crime would have been seen.
Nelson says after that, he disposed of her belongings in a white plastic bag that he threw in the Blue Earth landfill. After 8 long years, Faribault County investigators feel they have enough to charge Robert Nelson with the murder of the Blue Earth Jane Doe. But unfortunately, he doesn't recall her name.
It was a relief to us. It doesn't do much for the case because we're still trying to find out who she is.
On October 21st, 1988, Nelson pleads guilty in Smith County, Texas, to first-degree criminal sexual conduct and is sentenced to life in prison. Almost a year later, on August 25th, 1989, Nelson also pleads guilty to first-degree manslaughter.
He pled guilty, so he was sentenced under the Minnesota state guidelines. The county attorney said there's no way that he's ever coming out of Texas.
Robert Nelson received 16 years in prison to run concurrent with his life sentence in Texas.
It was kind of a surprise to get it solved after 8 years of who did it. But it was shocking when you have a law enforcement officer who was the one.
It's very unfortunate. I mean, those of us in law enforcement are held to a higher standard. We're put out there to protect and serve, not to pick up hitchhikers and kill people.
Although part of the case is now closed, there is still a mystery to be solved.
Basically, 1988, we have a killer, but we don't know who she is yet. And here she just lays every day, every year in our local cemetery.
21 years later, in 2001, a woman named Deborah Anderson from Blue Earth takes an interest in the case.
We had a friend who's a police officer, and one night he said, there's a woman buried in the cemetery out here. She was found in 1980 and she's never been identified. And I was like, what?
She was the most determined to want to know who that woman was who was murdered in our community. And so she made it a very big goal.
It just didn't occur to me that people could go missing and like truly just be forgotten. And I just couldn't accept that that was okay.
Deborah spends the next few years volunteering her time and learning everything she can to try and give this woman her identity back.
This case made leaps and bounds because of the private work Deb did on it.
27 years have passed since 18-year-old Michelle Boucher disappeared, and there have been many advances in technology, including DNA analysis. This opens the door for a national database called CODIS.
CODIS warehouses profiles from convicted offenders, unsolved crime scenes, and missing persons.
Many police departments start using this new technology to try and locate the missing and to identify those without a name. So police in Texas asked the family of Michelle to submit their DNA.
Local law enforcement there on their end suggested that they do the DNA just in case and get it in CODIS so they might be able to make a match.
The family is still hoping to have answers.
They never gave up looking. They were always looking for her.
Meanwhile, in Minnesota, Deborah Anderson is researching DNA in the hopes of using it in the Blue Earth Jane Doe case as the case lands on the desk of Detective Scott Adams.
I was assigned the case and basically became very familiar with the working case file, but there were not a lot of promising leads because so many had already been looked at.
Then Deborah comes up with an idea and decides to enlist the help of a Faribault County Sheriff's Office.
I wanted to have the DNA done and I wanted to have a facial reconstruction on the skull done. I knew exhumation would be the ticket.
We at the time talked about exhuming, that if we go through with this and get an order to exhume her and basically get new DNA in file, try to get a 3D image of her, just try to take a new look at the case.
But coordinating such a large endeavor with all its red tape will be challenging.
The cost of an exhumation can run anywhere up to $10,000, and it's just money that the county didn't have to put towards that type of thing.
I wasn't in control of budgets at the time. I was just an investigator. The decision was made for years. Basically, we won't exhume the body. How do we go about doing it?
Finally, in 2014, they get some help when an excavator volunteers.
He believed in the cause, and he said he would do it for free.
Blue Earth Jane Doe's remains are exhumed for DNA analysis.
It was amazing, really. It was a culmination of a whole lot of emotions. I couldn't believe that it was really happening.
They were able to extract usable DNA and put it into the National CODIS database.
And then I believe it was like a day or so later, my phone rang and he said, we got a match, and we just couldn't believe it.
Blue Earth Jane Doe is finally identified as 18-year-old Michelle Boucher of Bay City, Texas.
Samples was key. And I sat down on the floor and just started crying because I was in shock, because I was glad, because I was sad.
On March 5th, 2015, police in Minnesota contact the Matagorda County Police in Texas to let them know they have found Michelle Boucher after 35 years.
And the sister said to me on the phone, "Is this the Deborah Anderson that's been taking care of my sister all these years?" And I said, "Yes, it is," and they were very grateful.
They were so appreciative of the town of Blue Earth and the fact that we always remembered her.
Michelle's family have her remains cremated and take her back home to Texas. Both cases are finally closed. Although Michelle's killer is behind bars, knowing how and when her life ended is difficult for the family.
That was the hardest part, that I think it felt as though I took hope away from them, but I still think that it was the right thing to do. I would want to know. If it were my child, I'd want to know.
And detectives from Faribault are extremely grateful for those wet spring days in southern Minnesota.
I don't think we'd ever found the body if it hadn't been for the weather.
In upstate New York, a young woman disappears on a bitter cold November night.
I was confused because why would she just go missing? It doesn't make any sense.
My emotions started going wild because I didn't want to believe it.
As police mobilize to find her, they must deal with extreme winter temperatures.
Right from the get-go, this was a case that was played out in the cold.
I'd say every day was miserable because of the cold weather.
But could this wintry weather also help investigators find the truth behind her disappearance?
It involves violence, it involves deception, and ultimately involves the Hudson River.
I think the weather was critical to really get a sense of what happened to her.
Just 8 miles north of Albany, the state capital of New York, lies the old industrial city of Troy.
It's what's known as the capital region of New York State. There's 3 cities, Albany, Schenectady, and Troy. It's a very diverse city.
Troy has a lot of history, known as the Collar City, because it's where a lot of dress shirt collars were made. There's still all those old factory buildings there.
The city is on the western edge of Rensselaer County and sits on the eastern bank of the Hudson River.
The Hudson River is known as being a very strong current river. It's a wide river, it's a long river, and it's got a lot of stuff in the bottom.
The Hudson River is about 315 miles long and close to 3 miles wide and goes to around 200 feet at its greatest depth. It actually starts up in the Adirondack Mountains and water flows south through the city, eventually right out into the Atlantic Ocean.
Where the river meets Troy is called the Lower Hudson and is a tidal estuary that rises and falls with the ocean tides.
Estuaries are where rivers meet the sea. So the river experiences the same 2 high tides and 2 low tides every 24 hours, just like the Atlantic. And these tides are also affected by the moon, winds, and local weather, and can actually change direction.
There's nothing obstructing the river between Troy and the Atlantic Ocean. So as those tides raise, it causes the current to change directions, even go in the opposite direction.
The river is a large part of the Troy community.
There's definitely a lot of fishing. They do have the kayaking. You can also do a ton of biking. It's a beautiful scenery.
Most activities occur in the summer months because the winters in Troy are almost unbearable.
The cold season in Troy is harsh, with freezing temperatures usually beginning in November and can bring over 50 inches of snow annually. The coldest month of the year is January, with the average low of 18 degrees Fahrenheit and the high 32 degrees Fahrenheit.
There's a nasty kind of cold here. It's a biting cold. It gets very windy. You can go over a month here at times where it's below freezing the whole time.
And in December 2015, the people of Troy are enduring another frigid winter, while the police department, the FBI, and the New York State dive team gather at the Hudson River. They are looking for a critical piece of evidence in an unusual missing persons case that has challenged investigators for weeks.
This is one of those cases, it's like, wow, it's like something you would see in a movie.
As temperatures hovered just above freezing, a young woman named Sarah Moore called the police. She said she was worried about her girlfriend, 21-year-old Noelle Alcaramla, who had been missing for almost 24 hours.
She had left work. She worked at a local restaurant and never made it back home.
Noel Alcarambla was born on May 1, 1994 in Palo Alto, California, and was raised by her single mother, Deborah. The two had a bumpy relationship as her mom struggled to support them.
When she was little, it was rocky, but she was her mom's only child, so she tried to be closer with her mom.
Hoping to improve their financial situation, Noel and her mother moved often until finally settling in Troy, New York in 2005, when Noel was 11 years old. A loving little girl who had a passion for animals and the arts, Noel always focused on the positive side of life.
She was bright and bubbly all the time, no matter what circumstance she was going through. She was kind and helpful.
At the age of 15, Noel grew close to an 18-year-old girl named Sarah Moore.
Noel and Sarah grew up together. They became emancipated and moved out.
Anytime Noel got upset, that was the first person she wanted to go to, and vice versa.
Soon their friendship blossomed.
Noel, she tried having a relationship with a guy at one point in time. That didn't work out. She definitely was more into women. Her companion was Sarah.
Noel and Sarah struggled to make ends meet, but by 2013, they found a small place in downtown Troy.
Noel and Sarah lived in an apartment together. They did not have an automobile. They took the bus for transportation.
Now 19 years old, Noel had grown into a bright young woman who was quiet and sweet, but also ambitious.
Noel was my friend. You just could not like her. Could not want to smile when you were around her. And she just had an unbelievable drive that was unmatchable.
She had a few different goals. She would love to work with animals. Did at one point in time go to Hudson Valley Community College. Noel was a go-getter. She wanted better for her life.
Then in 2015, Noel's mother moved to Malone, New York, about 3 hours north of Troy. Noel, now 21 years old, found a job waitressing at a popular Italian restaurant a few miles from her apartment with Sarah and was doing well.
She was paying her bills, and she was thriving. Was probably the happiest I'd seen her.
But now Noel has suddenly vanished on a chilly November night. Police visited Noel's girlfriend, 24-year-old Sarah Moore, after she filed a missing persons report on Noel. She told officers that the last time she heard from Noel was just before 9 p.m. the night before, when Noel left work.
Noel had texted her that she would be home soon after departing the restaurant. She had never arrived home that night.
Sarah said Noel hadn't answered her cell phone since, which was very unusual.
She had texted friends and family wondering where Noel was and that she was concerned.
Noel just leaves to the restaurant and then she's not seen from. Nobody knows what happened to her.
Sarah said she and Noel have been together for 6 years, and it's not like her to take off without a word. When asked about her relationship with Noel, Sarah said they were happy.
We wanted to know if they had any domestic abuse history, and then Sarah told us that wasn't the case, that they had a good relationship.
They asked who else Noel may be close to.
The people who are closest to Noel are the ones most likely to have relevant information. So the police are trying to find out who she is and who are all the people who are in her life.
Sarah basically told us that she didn't have any friends or family in the area.
But Sarah described what Noel was wearing when she last saw her. A white blouse, black pants, and tan coat with a fur-trimmed hood.
From there, the police started to try to retrace her last known steps from when she left work.
When a massive investigation began to find Noel Alcarambla in November 2015, detectives had no idea that the winter weather and icy Hudson River would turn out to be their biggest allies.
There's no question that the weather plays a big part in this case.
I think the weather was critical.
In December 2015, after 21-year-old Noel Alcarambla disappeared, Investigators from the Troy Police Department, FBI, and New York State Dive Team are preparing to battle the freezing temperatures and icy waters of the Hudson River. They are looking for an important clue that may tell them what happened to the young woman.
In December, the water temperature of the Hudson River is between 30 and 44 degrees, which can be dangerous and actually even lethal. Exposure can do a couple things. It can cause the blood pressure to rise, and hyperventilation can occur in as little as 5 minutes.
This is a cold river. You're talking about freezing weather, too. So it definitely affects divers who have to go in the river.
There's only so long those divers can stay in the water safely, and they would rotate out, or else it became too dangerous for them.
On land, the winter temperatures offer little relief.
Members of the dive team and the investigative staff who are standing on the shore, you're freezing. And there's just no way around it. There's no shelter from that wind along the river.
But it's here they hope to find a key piece of evidence that will solve a mysterious missing persons case that started 2 weeks ago. The day after speaking to Noelle's girlfriend, Sarah Moore, detectives visited the restaurant where Noelle worked right before she went missing.
She was a waitress at an Italian restaurant. They said she was nice, she was dedicated.
We learned that she was a good employee, and she showed up to her shift on a regular basis.
She was doing really well, actually, for herself. Her coworkers loved her.
They said nothing seemed out of the ordinary the last night Noelle worked. She simply worked her shift and left.
Noelle, she took public transit, cab rides from friends. She walked a lot.
No one from the restaurant seemed to have any information.
It just seemed very suspicious because there was no reason why she would just disappear. This was a woman who just vanished.
Meanwhile, her friends were shocked to learn Noelle was missing.
Sarah called me, and I'm like, what's going on? My emotions started going wild. I didn't want to believe it.
I was confused because why would she just go missing? You know, doesn't make any sense.
But all of their calls to Noelle went unanswered.
Noelle's phone was her life. So as far as her just not answering anybody's phone call, it was weird. She would have answered one of us.
Soon after, Noelle's mother was notified that she was missing, and she drove down from further upstate New York.
Later that day, Deborah arrived at the police station extremely concerned about her daughter.
We interviewed Deborah because we wanted to know Noelle's history, and it became evident that Deborah did not like Sarah at all.
Deborah believed that Sarah was not honest with Noelle, and generally didn't believe Sarah was a very good person.
In fact, Deborah painted an entirely different picture about Noelle's relationship with Sarah.
They did have history of some domestic-related arguments.
Maybe a little more than some couples do. More on the side that there may have been a lot of screaming and yelling.
Sarah and Noelle were in a very toxic relationship. They loved each other, but they were also very codependent. There was a lot of jealousy on both ends.
Noelle had to sneak out the house to come hang out with me. Some days she would have tried to avoid to come home. It was very unhealthy.
Noelle and Sarah would constantly fight. They would fight about money, jobs, you name it. It was an argument.
Deborah said she believed Sarah wasn't telling the truth.
Deborah thought that Sarah was probably involved in the disappearance somehow.
Troy investigators requested Noelle and Sarah's cell phone records to figure out their movements the night of the 22nd. They also brought Sarah into the station for another conversation.
We did follow up with Sarah to kind of question her about the accusations of a tumultuous relationship between the two of them. And we were potentially looking at Sarah as a suspect.
When detectives confronted Sarah, she reluctantly admitted that she and Noelle had argued a lot.
I think she was not being 100% truthful because she grew up in an environment where people didn't trust police officers.
She said they actually had a fight before Noelle went to work that night. That's why she wasn't worried at first when Noelle didn't come home. She figured she needed some time to decompress. Detectives wondered if there was more to that fight.
We spent several hours speaking with Sarah to determine her whereabouts. that particular night.
But Sarah was adamant that she was home all night. Investigators asked her if she could think of anywhere Noelle might have gone.
And she mentioned that Noelle had a stepfather in the area.
Sarah told police that his name is Johnny Oquendo, and he and Deborah had recently separated.
Noelle's relationship with Johnny was very surface level. She liked him, but really she just kind of kept him around if she needed something, $20, $30. It was more of a relationship of convenience than it was out of love or care.
Sarah said she worked with Johnny.
Johnny Oquendo is a former meat packer and butcher. He's trained as a butcher.
Sarah and Johnny worked at the same butcher shop together, so she knew him very well. And we said that we wanted to speak to him. He may have some information that could help us.
Sarah told detectives that he lived near their apartment.
We did go to the residence, knocked on the door. There was no answer. We had Sarah call him several times. There was no response. We reached out to see if we could talk to him. And again, there was no reply.
As Troy detectives continued to speak with anyone that knew Noelle, they also asked the public for help.
On the second day of her disappearance, we put her photograph on the local nightly news, soliciting help from the general public to see if they had seen her.
Sure enough, the tips started to pour in, and one gave police a lead. Investigators hunt down a new person of interest in the case.
We had found out that he had been charged with a violent crime in the past.
On a cold November night, Noelle Alcaramla vanished in Troy, New York while on her way home from work. 2 weeks later, the Troy Police Department, the FBI, and the New York State Dive Team are searching the icy waters of the Hudson River in frigid conditions, believing crucial evidence may lie beneath its surface.
The weather, the temperatures, as well as just the current that time of year, it's a very difficult job for them to do.
They're hoping to find what they're looking for at the bottom of the Hudson, but it won't be easy.
The Hudson River has got a ton of sediment. There's a lot of stuff that's on the bottom of that river. So searching it involves basically feeling by hand, because as soon as anything gets stirred up, you can't see anything.
Because the Hudson is a tidal estuary, the river's current is strong, and it runs north for 6 hours, then south for 6 hours. This also stirs up sediment, decreasing the visibility.
It's not easy to sense things underwater or what they might be when you can't see them very well.
But it's in these dark, frigid waters that they are hoping to find something that will tell them what happened to the 21-year-old when she disappeared just before Thanksgiving.
We were certainly hoping for the best.
After they informed the media that Noelle Alcaramla was missing, police received hundreds of tips, and one of them seemed promising.
One lead that we received was from a woman who claimed that she saw Noelle standing on the street corner crying. The woman described the clothing that she wore when Noelle left the restaurant, and that wasn't information that we provided to the general public.
The street where the woman said she saw Noelle was lined with hotels. Detectives took Noelle's photo to each hotel, hoping someone else would recognize her, and it worked.
One of the hotel clerks told us that, that Noelle had stayed that night at the hotel of her disappearance. She was there with a male party.
The clerk provided detectives with the man's name.
We conducted a background check, and we had found out that he had been charged with a violent crime in the past. He had a manslaughter charge and was released from prison not too long ago. We thought that this may be a credible lead. We certainly wanted to speak to him.
Detectives tracked him down that evening.
We located him. He had advised us that, he was there, and he was with this particular woman.
But he said it wasn't Noelle. It was a different woman, and he gave police her name.
We went and interviewed that particular woman, and she confirmed everything. She looked strikingly like Noelle. They could have been sisters, but it wasn't Noelle, unfortunately. He ultimately wasn't involved.
Discouraged, investigators were back to square one. As days went by and temperatures remained cold, Noelle's loved ones began to panic.
I was very nervous. Does she have a jacket? Where is she sleeping? In the real cold weather, We take in our homeless. You can't survive in that cold. You'll have hypothermia.
And I'm like, well, I'm gonna have a search party. I'm gonna go out and look for her.
Kentris and I sat with Sarah for days on end. We walked all around town. We called homeless shelters. We called hospitals.
Meanwhile, investigators continue to reach out to Noel's stepfather, 39-year-old Johnny Oquendo, with no luck.
His mother had a marriage at some point to Johnny Oquendo. Noel was his stepdaughter. So automatically, he's a person that just police would want to talk to.
We had nothing else to go on. Noel was still missing, and we had no real credible leads to follow and nowhere to go at that point.
Then, a few days later, investigators got a big piece of the puzzle. One of Noel's co-workers came forward with information about Noel.
And that gentleman was interviewed. I think he was a chef at the restaurant.
We find out from the coworker that he had brought her home that night, which was a huge piece of information for us because we assumed she was taking the bus home.
So he was able to provide information to the police about where she was dropped off. And that gave them a starting point to look in a certain area.
Investigators are about to get their biggest lead yet in the missing persons investigation of Noel Alcaramla.
These cases are like puzzles. The more pieces start getting put into place, a picture starts to emerge.
In December 2015, multiple law enforcement agencies speculate critical evidence relating to the missing persons case of Noel Alcaramla may lie within the depths of the Hudson River. Despite extremely low temperatures, they continue searching the river bottom, but remain empty-handed.
They were contending with the cold weather, the cold water, and that made things miserable.
They're covering all the area. And as they're not finding it, they're expanding their search area, going a little bit further downstream or a little further out into the water.
The investigation has led them all here after 2 weeks of looking for the young woman. After a co-worker of Noel's told police he gave Noel a ride home from work the night she disappeared, they learned where he dropped her off.
And turned out that was near Johnny Oquendo's apartment.
So our assumption was that since she didn't know anybody else in that general area, that she probably went there for the night.
And when cell phone data came in for Sarah and Noel's phones, it backed up what the co-worker told them.
So that was consistent, and based on text messages between Noel and Johnny and text message between Noel and Sarah, we find out that it's probable that she may have gone to Johnny's house that night. It also confirmed that Noel's phone got turned off at a certain time that night and was never turned back on again.
The records also showed that Sarah was home all night, like she said.
We looked at her location data, and based on all the evidence that we had, we just didn't feel she was a credible suspect. But Johnny's definitely a person of interest at that point.
Unfortunately, police were still unable to reach him. So they put in a request for his cell phone data and did a little digging on him in the National Criminal Database.
That's when they really started to figure out that Johnny Oquendo might be something to this case, and something very significant.
Johnny Oquendo did have a criminal record. He was involved in a robbery.
I had actually prosecuted him about 20 years prior on an armed robbery that he went to trial on. He was convicted, given 25 years in prison. Obviously, he was paroled earlier than that, which is why he was out.
He was also a registered sex offender.
Johnny Oquendo has a prior sex offense from when he's younger. He's a violent guy. The fact that he is the mother's ex-husband in and of itself could be a little suspicious.
Police informed Noel's mother, Deborah, who claimed she never knew he was a sex offender. Deborah said they had exchanged letters for years before marrying.
Johnny was incarcerated in upstate New York, up near the Canadian border in Malone. Deborah had started a pen pal relationship with him, and she moved up there to be closer to him.
Her mother had married Mr. Oquendo while he was in state prison, but at some point, the two of them did split.
And then he came back to the Troy area, and she stayed up there.
Police contacted his probation officer and discovered Oquendo had recently violated his probation.
He was required to notify his address where he was living, and when he moved recently, he didn't do that, and that was part of the violation. But we didn't know where he was. Probation didn't know where he was.
Then, while detectives waited for his cell phone data, they received an odd call from Johnny Oquendo's landlord.
The landlord calls and says, hey, you may want to talk to these first floor tenants because they have some information, some story about the banister.
Detectives arrived at the apartment building, and there was no sign of Johnny. But they did notice a broken banister on the staircase. They spoke with the first floor tenants, who tell police about the night Noel went missing.
His downstairs neighbors specifically recalled hearing an argument between a male voice and a female voice.
Then they heard a loud thump, and then the argument stopped.
They said then, around 11 p.m., something startled them.
They said approximately a half an hour or so after that is when they heard this enormous crash outside their front door.
And something actually slamming into their door. When they opened the door, they found Johnny Oquendo in the hallway, fighting with a heavy suitcase.
The neighbors told detectives the suitcase had obviously slammed into the banister as well, breaking it. But Johnny refused any help.
And Johnny Oquendo says, no, puts himself between the suitcase and them and the wall and says, I got it, it's okay. Very suspiciously.
He took the suitcase, goes out the front steps, and they don't see him for the rest of the night.
They told police he was wearing a hat and a dark jacket. Detectives had a sinking feeling what was in that suitcase.
Once you have information like that, that tells us, okay, we believe he disposed of her body in a suitcase somehow.
But we certainly want to know. We need to confirm that.
Investigators reached out to the FBI for additional manpower.
Immediately after that, we start getting information back from his cell phone data, and we're able to determine kind of his path that he took throughout the city. Then we can start looking for surveillance video.
FBI agents skimmed through surveillance footage from all across the city on the night Noel vanished. And thanks to the winter weather, Oquendo wasn't hard to find.
In Troy, in the middle of winter, in any neighborhood, if it's really cold, nobody's out walking outside.
One of the analysts located a gentleman dragging a suitcase northbound through the city at about 11 o'clock at night, and he goes towards the river.
Although the video wasn't clear, they strongly believed it was Oquendo.
He's really the only individual on the street, and he's the only individual wearing that particular clothing.
I would say the odds of that being somebody else at that hour under those conditions are extraordinarily slim.
A few minutes later, the video footage showed the same person walking away from the river, back the way he came.
With no suitcase, so we want to know, where did that suitcase go? What did he do with the suitcase?
Investigators headed to the location by the riverfront.
And we're down there looking around everywhere. We're not finding a suitcase or finding Noel's body. The logical assumption would be that he put her in the water.
That was what really let investigators know this is a recovery mission, not a rescue mission anymore.
We felt that the best course of action is to get the dive team out and have the divers search the river.
Detectives contacted the New York State dive team to help them search the icy Hudson for the suitcase. Now, after divers have been searching the freezing river for 24 hours, enduring the unbearable winter weather and murky waters, they realize they're on the right track.
They had recovered the suitcase handle from the bottom of the river.
We surmised that as he lifted the suitcase over the railing, the weight of her body in that suitcase on top of the railing snapped the handle off, and he threw both into the water.
So that was very promising for us. It wasn't a smoking gun, but it certainly gave us an indication that probably is where the suitcase was dumped.
Detectives finally catch up with the elusive Johnny Oquendo as the icy waters of the Hudson River reveal the truth. During a freezing upstate New York winter, Troy detectives investigating the disappearance of 21-year-old Noelle Alcaramla believe she may have been killed by her stepfather, Johnny Oquendo, and disposed of in a suitcase in the Hudson River. But they have not found the suitcase, and Oquendo is still on the run.
Johnny Oquendo had been on the run since not long after Noelle went missing, and he triggered a parole violation.
Luckily, investigators find out Johnny has just been picked up for violating his probation and is sitting in a New York State prison. They bring him back to Troy for questioning. With Johnny Oquendo finally in police custody, he is questioned by detectives.
He was very cordial. He was compliant. He agreed to be interviewed. His statement was very short and very simple. He said that he did see Noelle that night, that he has information that could help us with our case, but after that, he specifically asked for an attorney, and we stopped all questioning at that point.
But this time, Johnny isn't going far.
As soon as we were done questioning him, he was immediately remanded back to the county for violating his probation.
With Oquendo unable to flee again, investigators focus on the search, hoping to bring Noelle Alcaramla home. Divers focus their search based on where the suitcase handle was found, but it's like finding a needle in a haystack.
We were worried, we were concerned. The river runs all the way to New York City. I mean, you're talking 300 miles of river. It could be anywhere.
And the divers are feeling the effects of the weather.
The biggest issue the divers had was the cold weather. They were also diving every single day for several weeks, so they were starting to get fatigued.
Realizing the suitcase didn't just sink, authorities decide to map the tides and currents.
We had consulted with the National Weather Service to try to better understand how the current and the temperatures may have affected the movement of her body in that suitcase once it was placed into the river.
The divers looked at the tide schedule to see when the tides were rising and falling, but it was difficult to simulate those scenarios because it's wintertime, there's snow on and off that could potentially affect the currents.
Meanwhile, Noelle's loved ones begin to lose hope.
It was very heartbreaking, not knowing what's going on, if they're gonna find her. Very emotional.
We knew she wasn't gonna come home after they started searching in the river. I was sad. We just wanted her body to be found.
As divers turn up empty-handed, investigators know they have to rethink search tactics.
We can't seem to locate the suitcase. We're pretty disheartened at that point. With no body, we have no murder.
Police decide to try a novel experiment with a dead pig.
It was a pig that was of an approximate weight to what we knew Noelle's weight to be. We put the pig in the suitcase and right into the river to see if it would give us a better idea of how the weather and the current in that river would have taken her body.
And at that point, they got a really good idea that not only could a suitcase float from where it was dropped in, it could float for several miles in that strong Hudson River current.
So we started notifying police agencies from here in New York City, asking them to check their shorelines, check the Hudson, and be on the lookout for a suitcase.
Then on December 30th, 5 weeks after Noelle went missing, police get a break in the case.
A gentleman who ran one of the big commercial river boats down in Albany had mentioned that he'd seen a suitcase floating at some point.
I thought, it can't be. It seemed really far for the suitcase to go. It's got to be a good 20 miles. So I wasn't very hopeful, but I figured anything's better than nothing.
The entire operation moved down to that location, and it was not long at all once the divers got into the water that we were able to locate the suitcase.
They bring the suitcase to shore and open it.
She'd been in the water for a month at that point, and I'd seen bodies that had been in the water for a month, and usually they're decomposed pretty substantially.
We didn't know what state her body was going to be in.
But thanks to the icy Hudson waters, they can easily tell it's Noelle.
They were able to find her in good enough condition that they were able to identify her.
I was very surprised by the condition of the remains. It was almost, her body was in pristine condition.
Although investigators won't know if evidence has been washed away until the autopsy is complete.
Biological evidence degrades over time, and there was the concern that water would have contaminated whatever may have been left behind on her body.
Will the weather help authorities get justice for Noelle Akaramla?
As it turns out, for the case, we were fortunate that the water was so cold.
After Troy investigators suspected Johnny Oquendo murdered Noelle Akaramla, placed her body in a suitcase and threw her in the Hudson River, the winter weather created an enormous challenge in their search for her.
You hate having to be out there in the freezing cold temperatures hour after hour, week in and week out.
But the tides and strong current of the Hudson River, based on weather patterns, also revealed her body.
Because the Hudson River flows both ways, her body could have easily flowed out to the Atlantic Ocean, but instead, it stayed within the river.
In this case, the river turned up the body. The weather, the river, the elements were a huge part of that.
And the icy water was an ally by preserving her body so that she was identifiable. And it's about to give police the evidence they need to put a killer behind bars. The following day, the medical examiner performs an autopsy.
There were a few possible different causes of death. Noelle's body did have some blunt force trauma to her head, but also a plastic grocery bag tied in a way around her neck that would appear to indicate she was strangled in some way.
We assumed possibly asphyxiation, but really couldn't confirm that because she had water in her lungs. We couldn't rule out the fact that she was still alive when she was dumped in the river. So maybe she drowned, or maybe she was suffocated with the plastic bag.
They perform a sexual assault kit as well and are shocked at the findings.
The sexual assault kit determined that she had seminal fluid in her vaginal canal.
Given the amount of time that she had been in the water, the medical examiner was not very confident that we would find semen inside of her, but we did.
Perfectly preserved by the near-freezing temperatures of the Hudson River, the sample is tested for DNA.
That temperature factor was huge in preserving not only Noelle Akaramla's body, was itself able to preserve DNA evidence inside of it. That DNA evidence was tested and came back 100% positive match for Johnny Oquendo.
It was obvious they had sexual relations that night, so at that point, he couldn't deny that he had no involvement at all in her disappearance.
Police finally have their smoking gun. On December 6, 2016, Johnny Oquendo is charged with second-degree murder, first-degree strangulation, and concealment of a human corpse.
I was relieved when I found out Johnny was being charged. I just really wanted justice. She deserves every bit of justice.
At his arraignment, he pleads not guilty. But as the prosecution prepares for trial, they face a major setback.
One of the people who knew Noelle Akaramla most intimately was Sarah Moore, and Sarah Moore took her own life not long before that trial began.
Sarah's death, that took everybody for a wild turn, and it was a hard time for everybody.
On October 30th, 2017, almost 2 years since Noelle was murdered, 40-year-old Johnny Oquendo finally goes to trial. Prosecutors lay out what they believe happened that night. They say on the night of November 22nd, 2015, Noelle had her coworker drop her off at Johnny's apartment after work.
She had gotten dropped off. She went over there. They engaged in sexual relations of some sort.
At some point, they say an argument ensued, but what it was about is still debatable.
We assume that they had a consensual relationship going on and that maybe she wanted to call off that consensual relationship or inform her mother of that consensual relationship, which certainly would have led to some problems. Our other speculation was that they had no previous sexual relationship, and that night he potentially raped her and she fought back.
Because the downstairs neighbors heard a man and woman arguing and a lot of loud noise from up there.
With the injury to her head, we suspected that maybe when the first floor tenants heard the loud bang on the floor, that might have been her head striking the floor.
Prosecutors say then they believe Johnny possibly strangled her with a bag and then placed her body in a suitcase.
We may never know exactly why he killed her.
After dumping her body in the suitcase into the Hudson River, Johnny then took off, thinking he got away with murder. But he never counted on the cold weather foiling his plan.
It worked in our favor as far as preserving evidence that was good.
The defense argues that Oquendo had no motive to kill Noel and that the evidence had been contaminated.
The defense was going to try to look at anything they could do to sort of shift the blame away from Johnny Oquendo.
But it doesn't work. On November 17, 2017, the jury deliberates for less than 3 hours before finding him guilty of all charges.
The evidence was just so strong that I think the jury, they saw the picture that we painted very, very clearly.
I never would have thought he would have did something like that to his stepdaughter. Who would do that besides a monster?
Johnny Oquendo is sentenced to 25 years to life.
It's really just a horrific disregard for human life.
Although Noel Acaramla's friends and family finally have closure, it'll never bring her back.
She had so much that she could have done with her life, and she wanted to do with her life. It's very sad. She didn't deserve any of it.
Noel lost an opportunity to become everything that she dreamed of. I lost a friend, a good friend, that brought light wherever she went. And the world lost a kind, pure soul that you just couldn't find anywhere else.
And if it wasn't for her killer underestimating the power of a New York winter, he might have walked away free.
He picked the wrong time of year to commit such an egregious crime.
I'm thankful that he made that mistake, because that mistake is the one that put him away.
After freezing temperatures encompass the mountains of North Carolina, the body of a man is discovered buried in snow.
It was frozen to the ground, in ice, in snow, right off the Blue Ridge Parkway.
The weather in the mountains that winter was extremely cold, with temperatures down into the teens.
The discovery starts an international, multi-jurisdictional investigation.
I was like, wow, there's a lot of international implications going on here. This is going to be quite the interesting investigation.
And then it just got even more bizarre.
There was blood spatter up above her. She had been shot at least once.
Why would this happen? Why my mom?
Will the icy winter weather help or hinder investigators to bring a cold-blooded killer to justice? Deep in North Carolina's mountainous high country lies Watauga County, just 2 hours northwest of Charlotte.
North Carolina is made up of the coastal area with the Piedmont and the foothills in the center of the state. And then in the western part of the state, that's where the Blue Ridge Mountains and the Appalachian Mountains are found.
We have the tallest mountains in the eastern United States. Mount Mitchell is the tallest peak. We have a 6,000-foot elevation ski area up there in that area.
The region is a hidden gem for nature lovers and adventure seekers alike.
It's the kind of place where in the spring and the summer people go hiking. There are great trails up through the Blue Ridge Mountains. It's a beautiful part of the country.
And The Blue Ridge Parkway, one of the most scenic drives in America, winds right through these mountains. But like any mountainous region, the weather here can be dramatic and unpredictable.
Latitude and topography really influence a location's climate. On Blue Ridge Parkway, elevation can change a few thousand feet over a relatively short distance. So at the higher altitudes, temperatures can be 10 to 15 degrees cooler than some of the low-lying areas.
People who are not familiar with North Carolina don't realize what a vast difference just a couple of hours of driving can make as far as the weather, the temperature, and the amount of snow on the roads.
In fact, snow can come as early as November on the Parkway, sometimes with little warning.
In the winter, North Carolina is somewhat protected by the mountains, but occasionally cold air can move from the north or northeast from these Arctic high-pressure systems. So this causes weather conditions that are both extreme and fast-changing.
Although the area averages around 30 inches of snow, more in the higher elevations, it's the wind locals look out for.
The wind will sting your face, it will sting your eyes, it will cause your tears to freeze as you walk along, and it's one of the more difficult things to deal with.
And on December 20th, just one day before the official start of winter, a snowstorm covered the area in white.
This storm ended up dumping an average of 5 to 10 inches of snow over the mountains, the northern foothills, and the extreme northwest Piedmont of North Carolina. But the snowfall amounts, they ranged over a foot on the higher ridges and even up to 20 inches over on Mount Mitchell.
This extreme weather will put investigators in hazardous conditions, potentially hindering their ability to solve a bizarre and complicated murder. With temperatures below freezing, police in Watauga County receive an unusual call.
A caller had reported that they had found a body in the woods just off of the Blue Ridge Parkway.
A DOT surveyor was out there in the woods trying to find markers and do some surveying.
When he saw a pair of bare feet of an adult person sticking up out of the snow.
Police send a deputy to the area called Deep Gap off the Blue Ridge Parkway to secure the scene, while Detective Paula May is notified.
We've had people who have gotten lost that were hiking in the area, but the fact that the person was barefoot in this extreme weather caused us immediately some concern.
Investigator May arrives and makes her way through the slippery conditions.
I arrived at the scene with another detective. I met with the worker, and he led me to the location where the body was found.
May can see the outline of a body buried beneath several inches of snow, with the two bare feet sticking out.
The body itself was located in an indented portion of the ground where the roots on the end of the tree had pulled up out of the ground, and the body was kind of sheltered up underneath the base of that fallen tree.
Investigators carefully remove some of the snow. They quickly discover it's the naked body of a white male with dark hair and a mustache.
We did not want to brush the snow off of the body and disturb any evidence. So we did as little as possible as far as disturbing the snow on top of the body.
The victim not having any clothes, there had to be some foul play. This wasn't a hiker that got lost and took off all their clothes and froze in the snow. That wouldn't make any sense.
At that point, we're pretty certain that we're going to be dealing with a homicide.
Luckily, because of the winter weather conditions, the body appears well preserved.
We saw some decomposition that was occurring and some discoloration in the skin, but we could see that he was not severely beaten.
He had some animal activity on his feet. That was pretty much it. Very well preserved, except for that.
As they clear snow from around the head, they discover the most likely cause of death.
There was an obvious gunshot wound, an entrance wound to the right side of the victim's neck and the left side of his temple on his head.
But determining time of death could be a challenge.
The body had been there for some time, for multiple days at least, and possibly even longer because of the condition of the body and the weather.
But one thing's for sure.
Robbery was not the motive in this case because he was wearing a gold ring and a nice watch.
Detectives look around the body for any clue to the man's identity, but find nothing.
There's no identification because he's naked. There's no papers lying about. There's no driver's license.
Investigators assess the icy, barren crime scene. They need to comb the area around the body for any evidence that might be connected to the man's murder. But the treacherous winter conditions threaten their efforts.
We were at 19 degrees when I checked on the scene, and it was getting colder. The wind had picked up, so the wind chill factor was also a major issue.
A cursory search of the snowy area reveals nothing useful, not even a track or footprint of any kind. Most likely, fresh snow has covered anything that could have been there. As darkness looms, the sky hints more snow is on the horizon. And with temperatures in the teens, they must all work quickly.
The weather up there during the winter especially is significantly more severe.
We just had a limited number of hours of daylight left. But in addition to the darkness, the fog was rolling in.
As detectives race against the elements to salvage their crime scene, they soon learn the winter weather may be a blessing in disguise.
Extremely hot temperatures will cause one thing to happen. Here's an example of extremely cold temperatures causing something else altogether.
During a cold and snowy January 1994, Watauga County investigators have just found a man shot to death beneath a blanket of snow in the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina.
He was covered with snow right off the Blue Ridge Parkway. He was naked, with the exception of a watch and a ring.
Police are battling these freezing temperatures and snow-covered mountains looking for clues before more snow falls.
This was a very cold winter in Watauga County history. After a snowstorm brought heavy snow back in December, they had below average temperatures through January.
We were trying to process the scene as quickly and yet as thoroughly as we could while we were there that day.
Knowing the weather can change fast, and with darkness coming, police spread out.
The snow is a major issue as far as us being able to find any evidence that might be left on the scene. Fog was an issue, and also the temperature was dropping.
But just as they're about to call the search off for the night, investigators find a promising clue just a few feet from the body.
An 18-inch length of tape consisting of two different types of tape, which were together, had been recovered.
It appears to be masking and electrical black tape stuck together, and police assume it was probably used to bind the man when he was shot.
It had a bullet hole in the tape. It had blood droplets and hair that we found on the back of that length of tape.
Thankfully, the weather preserved this vital piece of evidence.
Because of the snow cover, even though Watauga County has some very high winds, it ensured that that tape remained right where it was dropped. So that was our good fortune.
As the sun starts to set, law enforcement hopes the body might yield more substantial evidence. They carefully attempt to lift the body to send to autopsy, when the harsh elements may again be more of a blessing than a curse.
The body was frozen to the ground. There was no snow underneath him. In other words, he wasn't just placed there on top of the snow.
Which tells investigators he must have been there before the snowfall on December 20th, which means their victim had to have been out there for a minimum of 2.5 weeks.
And so now the job becomes discovering who this is.
Later that night, Detective May returns to the station and searches their missing persons report, but comes up empty.
We initially sent out a 50-mile radius bulletin and then a statewide bulletin for missing persons that would fit the description of the body that we found. One of the first agencies that responded was the Salisbury Police Department, and in general, the description matched. There was also mention in the missing persons report about a watch and a ring that he was wearing.
The 40-year-old man was reported missing 3 weeks prior on December 15th, 90 miles southeast in Salisbury, North Carolina. His name is Victor Gunnarsson. And according to the Salisbury police, Victor Gunnarsson had a very colorful background. Victor Gunnarsson was born and raised in Jämja, Blekinge, Sweden. A natural people person, making friends came easy to Victor.
Victor knew several languages and he had friends everywhere, so you never knew where he was or what friend he was with.
He had a lot of lady friends. He told them a lot of stories about mysterious things that he did for a living, maybe working with governments as a secret agent or things like that.
Victor also had very strong political views.
He was very liberal and a very up-and-coming politician.
And in February 1986, at age 32, Victor's views would put him in the middle of one of the most infamous chapters of Swedish history.
Swedish Prime Minister Olof Palme had been assassinated on the streets of Stockholm in 1986. He and his wife had attended a movie after someone walked up behind him and shot him in the back.
The Swedish government quickly suspected Victor.
In the days prior to that assassination, he was overheard at a bar speaking loudly against Olof Palme.
So they brought him in for questioning, placed him in a photographic lineup, which was presented to the wife of the Prime Minister, and she failed to identify Gunnarsson as the person who shot Palme.
After a thorough but grueling investigation, all charges were eventually dropped against Victor, and the case was never solved. But the damage had already been done.
His name had been ruined. It had hurt his standing in the community with the different groups he was involved in. And so the government of Sweden did have to basically pay him off.
In 1989, he received a $75,000 settlement from the Swedish government for the false charges and negative publicity. That's when Victor decided to come to America for political asylum. Once on American soil, Victor tried to settle in and make it home.
He was someone who enjoyed a good time. He was very outgoing, had a lot of friends here, and so he came here to start a new life.
Because of friends that he had, he took up residence at the Lakewood Apartments in South Salisbury.
He spoke perfect English. He's just trying to blend in with society and just be a normal person.
But now police believe they have found his body, naked and frozen to the ground in the mountains of North Carolina. They contact authorities in Sweden about the Prime Minister's assassination and request Victor's dental records and fingerprints.
I was like, wow, there's a lot of international implications going on here.
Investigators must now consider if they are dealing with a politically motivated murder.
Could this be some sort of a hit?
After a body is found shot to death and frozen in snow in the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina, law enforcement believes it could be 40-year-old Swedish native Victor Gunnarsson, who's been missing for 3 weeks. Police are determined to find out who killed him and why.
His background was one that had a lot of intrigue because at one time he was a suspect in the assassination of the Prime Minister of Sweden.
Possibilities ranged from a professional hit from Sweden. He could have been involved in drug trades or something like that that we hadn't learned about yet.
After contacting Swedish authorities to see if there is a political connection, Detective Paula May examines Victor's missing persons report from the Salisbury police. She learns Victor was reported missing on December 15th.
Victor Gunnarsson was officially reported missing by the apartment manager. He lived in an apartment complex in Salisbury.
According to the report, the manager, who would see Victor daily, told Salisbury police that she became worried when she hadn't seen him for about 2 weeks.
She knew that he had not been there for some time, for several weeks. And so the apartment manager made that report.
His car was still there. So wherever he had gone, he had left without his car, and he took his car everywhere.
She says when she went to check on him, his apartment door was unlocked, and his keys and wallet were inside. After a search of Victor's car and apartment, police found no evidence of foul play or anything about the Prime Minister's murder.
The apartment manager had pictures of Victor Gunnarsson, and they were able to match that with the body that was found off the Blue Ridge Parkway.
And when they get Victor's prints and dental charts from the Swedish government, it's confirmed. The next morning, investigators hoped the results of Victor's autopsy might shine some light.
The body had begun to thaw, but was still in really good condition since it had been basically frozen all that time.
The snow and ice had preserved the body, helping the medical examiner confirm the cause of death.
The autopsy verified that Gunnarsson had been killed by 2 shots from a .22 caliber gun.
He extracts 1 slug from Victor's left temple and 1 from the right side of his neck. The wintry weather was also helpful in other ways.
The weather greatly preserved Victor Gunnarsson's body so that even the contents of his stomach were still able to be determined during his autopsy.
Because the body had been basically frozen, we were able to determine there was baked potato skin in the stomach contents of the victim.
Since the potato had not been fully digested, this means he was killed within a few hours of eating. And the preserved tape found at the crime scene could finally be linked to the murder.
That piece of tape was worn by the victim. It was placed on him by his killer. It had a bullet hole, blood droplets, and hair from the victim. So we were able to easily link that to the crime itself.
Based on the evidence they do have, police have to wonder if Victor's murder is connected to the Prime Minister's assassination in some way.
It seemed very professional. He's in a remote location. He's found nude. He has 2 gunshot wounds. It had elements that you just don't see in crimes that normally happen here.
Then, Watauga County investigators get news that changes everything.
We had this intrigue of this potential international conspiracy to take out this guy, and then it just got even more bizarre.
Detectives uncover new information that forces the entire investigation into a different direction.
Truth is stranger than fiction.
Detectives in North Carolina are investigating the murder of Swedish native Victor Gunnarsson and battling the extreme winter elements. Police have been looking at every angle in Victor's homicide, including a possible connection to the Swedish Prime Minister's assassination 7 years earlier. When they get information that completely changes their focus. Investigator Paula May receives a phone call from the Rowan County Sheriff's Office, which is close to Salisbury, North Carolina, where Victor lived.
During the month of December of 1993, The Rowan County Sheriff's Office had begun work on another homicide investigation.
The victim is a 77-year-old lady named Catherine Miller, who was found shot to death in her Salisbury home a month earlier. Catherine Miller was born on Valentine's Day in 1916 in Cabarrus County, North Carolina, eventually moving to Salisbury.
Catherine Miller was a really sweet little lady. She was active in her church. She always volunteered in the community.
By 1993, Catherine had survived the death of 2 husbands, both of whom she was lovingly married to for nearly 20 years. Catherine was also a doting mother to her only child, Kay Whedon, and adored her 16-year-old grandson, who both lived just down the street.
My mother was my best friend, the most beautiful person in the world. Nobody would hurt my mother. Nobody hated my mother. Everybody loved my mother.
Which is what makes her murder all the more shocking to everyone involved. Watauga investigators learned from officials in Salisbury that 6 days after Victor was reported missing, police were asked to do a welfare check on Catherine Miller.
Catherine Miller never missed work, so when she did not show up that Thursday morning, it was unusual.
Worried for her safety, her co-workers told police they had gone by her home.
They went to the house and no one came to the door. Catherine's car was still at the house.
Through a window, they could see the house had been ransacked. That's when they called the police.
They went to the local high school where Kay Whedon was an English teacher and told her about it.
Kay and the others met police back at her mother's house.
They had to have a Rowan County deputy sheriff force entry for the welfare check.
Inside, he found a shocking scene.
Mrs. Miller was on the floor with her back against her refrigerator. There was blood spatter up above her. He backed out and preserved the scene for investigators to show up.
He then broke the news to Kay.
He said, "She's gone." And what do you mean she's gone? And he said, "She's not alive, you know, she died." I had the most primal scream anyone's ever heard.
Homicide investigators soon descended on the scene and examined the body.
It was pretty obvious that she had been shot, and that was how she died.
There's no sign of any forced entry, which leads you to the conclusion that maybe she knew who her attacker was.
At first glance, it appeared to be a robbery gone bad.
Some of the property in the house had been disturbed. Drawers had been pulled out, scattered about, but things of value had not been taken.
It looked like it was staged. So that immediately told investigators there may be something more going on here.
After a thorough analysis, the crime scene yielded no clues to Catherine's killer. 2 days later, the coroner recovered 2 .38 caliber bullets from Catherine's skull.
We were told by the lab that it was probably fired by a Colt Detective Special.
Although the weapon that killed Victor is different than the one that killed Catherine, 2 execution-style slayings can't be ignored. But then Watauga County investigators discovered the real connection between these murders.
Investigators were able to determine that Victor Gunnarsson had been dating the daughter of Catherine Miller.
Kay Whedon became the common denominator in the murder of Victor Gunnarsson and the murder of Catherine Miller. Catherine being Kay's mother, and Victor Gunnarsson being the last person she was with in a dating relationship before he disappeared.
Investigators from both counties and the State Bureau of Investigation team up.
We really became a four-man team. The two investigators from Watauga County and the two investigators from Rowan County.
We began sharing information with each other and conducted a number of interviews.
On another cold winter's day, the team sits down with Kay Whedon and asks about her relationship with Victor Gunnarsson.
I met Victor right around Thanksgiving, so I didn't really know him all that long. Probably a month.
They had been introduced from a mutual friend. She characterized Victor as someone that she had been seeing, that they had been going out.
We were just having a good time, enjoying each other's company, but it wasn't serious. He was probably one of the handsomest men that I had ever met. What made him even more handsome was because he was just so nice and so gentle.
She tells police that the last time she saw Victor alive was the night of Friday, December 3rd, 1993.
They had eaten at a seafood restaurant, and sure enough, he had had a baked potato.
Which tells detectives, based on the frozen contents of his stomach from the autopsy, he must have been killed shortly after that meal.
When he left that night, he kissed her goodnight on the front stoop of her porch, and Kay never heard from Victor again.
That was 12 days before he was reported missing by his landlord. Investigators asked Kay if there's anyone in her life that might want to hurt those in her inner circle.
Why would somebody want to kill her mother and one of her boyfriends?
That's when she drops a bombshell. Investigators from two jurisdictions working to solve two murders learn of a shocking suspect.
You're trying to ruin me in this damn town? You're not going to do it anymore. I'm tired of it, and I'm going to put a stop to it.
In the winter of 1993, investigators from North Carolina's Watauga County and Rowan County are trying to find out who shot and killed 40-year-old Victor Gunnarsson and 77-year-old Catherine Miller.
So you have two homicides that took place in two different parts of the state, and yet what draws them together is this one common element, and that's Kay Whedon.
While questioning Kay about anyone who may have wanted to hurt her mother or her new boyfriend, Victor, investigators learn about another man in her life. The man is 43-year-old L.C. Underwood, and detectives are shocked to learn he's a former Salisbury police officer.
He's got over 19 years of law enforcement experience in North Carolina, including several years' experience as a detective.
Kay says the pair were introduced by a neighbor.
He was like what you would consider the knight in shining armor. You thought, this man is too good to be true.
Then, after just a few months, Kay says she started to see red flags in the relationship.
It didn't take long till he became very jealous. He was short-tempered. He demanded that Kay be in touch with him and let him know where she was and what she was doing.
Kay's mother, Catherine, also saw the signs.
Catherine Miller was advising Kay to stay away from him. Kay tried to end the relationship several times.
But L.C. would shower her with love letters and gifts.
I wanted to get away, but he kept dragging me back in. You know, I kept saying, okay, well, you know, I'll give you another chance.
When she'd ended again, he would stalk her. Then, in early 1993, Kay tells investigators she started receiving threatening letters.
Elsie Underwood somehow convinced her that it could not possibly be him because, of course, he loved her.
I was really naive, thinking that you don't do those things to people when you tell them you love them.
Since then, she says she didn't hear much from him and thought she was finally getting her life back. But to police, he's now their #1 suspect, regardless of his law enforcement career. But when they reach out to Underwood, he refuses to speak to police or hand over any guns he owns.
He was certainly someone that I knew, and he completely refused to talk to me.
He refused to cooperate any further. So our level of suspicion of him grew.
Despite Underwood's refusal to talk, investigators have enough to get a search warrant for his home and vehicles. Although Underwood is out of town during the search, his attorney lets the team in, and they discover that Underwood is obsessively neat.
The house was meticulous. It was almost as if a real estate agent had staged the home for a showing.
His closets were very neat. All of his shirts were hung facing the same direction, just really extreme obsessive behavior. It was obvious just looking through his house that he had a problem.
Crime scene techs fail to locate either of the weapons used in the recent homicides. Then something catches their eye.
On the back of his dryer in the laundry room, the wire had been wrapped with electrical tape, so we decided to go ahead and seize that as well.
The hope is to match it with the tape found next to Victor Gunnarson's body. Investigators also impound his cars.
We believe it was the 1979 Monte Carlo that was used to transport Gunnarson because when we opened up the trunk, we saw on the lid of the trunk what we thought was a footwear impression.
They remove the trunk mat and send it to the crime lab as well. Unfortunately, it will take some time for any results to come in. Over the next few months, while they wait for the lab results, they continue to strengthen their case. They discover that on December 3rd, the last time Victor was seen alive, LC asked a fellow police officer to run a license plate for him.
The sheriff's deputy called the tag in for LC and was given Victor Gunnarson's information.
In July 1995, Agent Don Gale reaches out to him, hoping he can get LC to slip up and admit to something.
I set up my recording equipment and I placed the call to LC Underwood. Once I say, LC, this is Don Gale, he immediately just goes ballistic.
I'm gonna tell you something, Don Gale. You're gonna quit spreading these damn lies and rumors that you've been spreading about me.
Well, give us that code, Detective Special. And that Dan Wesson 22.
I ain't got to say to you. I don't have nothing to say to you about nothing.
Although everything is pointing to the retired officer being involved in these murders, without any solid physical evidence, investigators fear they won't be able to arrest him.
It was just not enough to gamble in charging him, not knowing whether or not we could convict him.
Will the icy North Carolina winter help detectives get the breakthrough they need to help put a ruthless killer away for good? After finding Victor Gunnarson's body in the snow-covered Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina, the extreme weather challenged investigators, but it ultimately worked in their favor.
You had a body that was basically in suspended animation because it had been frozen.
We were able to determine what the contents of the stomach of the victim were. And that was very helpful in helping us to assess the time of death.
It also preserved the tape found at the scene. All of this has helped police close in on their main suspect, 43-year-old LC Underwood. Because the state crime lab is overloaded, it takes more than a year to get forensic results. Then finally, on a balmy October day, the findings are in, and it's just what investigators need.
20 characteristics matched up between the tape that was recovered behind his washer or dryer and the tape that was recovered at the crime scene in Watauga County.
But the final nail in Underwood's coffin is that 16 human hairs were found embedded in the trunk mat of his car. They use a special test on the mitochondrial DNA of the hair that thankfully the winter weather preserved.
It showed conclusively that it had to be Victor Gunnarson's head hair.
And that is ultimately why the district attorney in Watauga County gave us the go-ahead to make the arrest.
On October 13th, 1995, Elsie Underwood is arrested and charged with the first-degree murder and kidnapping of Victor Gunnarsson. Then in June of 1997, 4 years after the murders of Victor Gunnarsson and Catherine Miller, Underwood goes to trial in the Gunnarsson case. Based on the evidence, prosecutors present their case.
It was painfully evident that Underwood was not going to have Kay Whedon be in a relationship with anybody else. If he couldn't have her, no one was going to have her.
They say Underwood put his plan into action on that cold December 3rd, 1993, when he saw Victor's car in Kay's driveway that night.
He called a personal friend who was a deputy to call and run the license plate.
With Victor's address in hand, Underwood drove to his apartment, filled with rage.
He probably just asked him to step outside to get in his car.
They believe at gunpoint, he bound Victor and put him in his trunk.
Once he got him in his car, then he's at his mercy. Underwood transported him alive in the freezing temperatures in the trunk of his car to Watauga County, to the area where he probably marched him in on foot at gunpoint.
Once in the snowy mountains, Underwood most likely forced Victor to remove his clothing.
He killed Victor Gunnarsson there in the woods off the Blue Ridge Parkway on that cold winter night.
They say he left him there, thinking no one would ever find him. But killing Victor wasn't enough for Underwood.
Underwood knew that Catherine Miller was advising Kay to stay away from him and did not care for him. And he resented that a great deal.
Prosecutors believe within 5 days of Victor's murder, Underwood went to the home of Catherine Miller and shot her to death as well.
With these two significant persons out of Kay's life, then Kay will be left to come back to him.
They say afterward, Underwood thought he got rid of all of the evidence. But he never considered how the winter weather would end up being investigators' best ally.
It gave preservation to a crime scene in a way that investigators rarely get.
On July 5th, 1997, Elsie Underwood is officially convicted on all charges. He is sentenced to life plus 40 years for his crimes. With such a hefty sentence, they decide not to prosecute for Catherine Miller's murder.
However, all of the evidence we had against him regarding Catherine Miller was introduced in his trial for the kidnapping and the murder of Victor Gunnarsson.
On December 23, 2018, after serving just over 20 years in prison, Elsie Underwood dies of natural causes. Although in the end justice prevailed, the damage Elsie did is irreversible.
You know, Elsie Underwood ruined my life, taking away two people that I cared a lot about.
I have always felt really bad for Victor Gunnarsson because it was strictly being in the wrong place at the wrong time.
And if it hadn't been for the late December snowstorm of 1993 and the frigid temperatures, investigators may have never solved this case.